This is Brighter Rays, and this study is called Fear Not, for I am with you. And we're looking at Genesis chapter 26. Today we're looking at 18 through 22. And this study today is called God's People Struggle. Let's start with verse 18. Our story starts with Isaac having to dig again the wells of water that his father Abraham had dug. Why does he have to do this? Because the Philistines had filled the wells in after the death of Abraham. It's been a few weeks since we looked at Genesis chapter 21, but remember what happened there. Abraham was sojourning in the same area and had dug a well, but the servants of that Abimelech had seized the well. Then Abraham and Abimelech made a peace treaty. They made that oath. They made the covenant between themselves. And apparently the Philistines believed that the treaty only lasted as long as Abraham lived. Because as soon as he was dead, they stopped up all the wells. So like, well, Abraham's gone, let's fill the wells. They didn't extend the treaty to Isaac or anybody else. You know, it's just like, we only had this treaty with Abraham, not with his son. So they just filled the wells back up. And so Isaac goes back to the old wells and digs them out again. And he renames the wells what Abraham had named them. So Isaac honors his father and reestablishes what his father had built. And also sends a message to the Philistines that he was now taking over in his father's place. He was the head of this family. He was the leader. And really, that they are in violation of the old oath. Remember, he's trying to remind them, hey, guess what? He kind of sends them that message, like, hey, you're in violation of what you told my father Abraham, that we were going to have peace. And so now that old treaty is basically broken. So if they would have kept the arrangement there that the wells would belong to Abraham, things would have stayed the same, but they had filled them. So things are different. Then when we move on to 19 through 21, at this point we see that the Philistines have not responded to what Isaac is doing. But Isaac begins to expand, right? They don't mind that he opens the wells back that Abraham had. But now he begins to dig more wells. He's digging new wells. So the old wells weren't enough for all the flocks and sheep and all that he had. So now he needs to dig more wells, and so he needs more space. He's growing. He's expanding the operation now. The Philistines were tolerant of him opening the old wells, but now he's digging new ones and expanding. They were not okay with that. They weren't okay. Remember, they're already envious of him, so now they're like, wow, this guy's growing. So Isaac's servant they dig a new well, and the Philistine herdsmen lay claim to the well. They say, the water is ours. Isaac gives a well a derogatory name. It wasn't a good one. It was a bad one. He calls it contention. So this was the well of contention. And then he moves on from that location. Then they dig a second well. The Philistines find out that Isaac is still trying to expand, and so they lay claim to that well too. So they keeps trying to stop him. So Isaac calls that well Sitnah, or enmity. That's not a good name. So Isaac has declared the oath between his father and the Philistines dead. He's like, we have a contention, but now we're enemies. And so that's what he's saying to them. This is the well of enemies. So the tree's dead. Remember that the Philistines were envious of Isaac. You gotta remember that from the last story, is that they didn't like him. They kicked him out of the city. So that envy is now turned to hatred. Now they just don't like the guy. Now they're enemies with him. You know, his blessings are a stench to him. It distinct to them. It's like, man, this guy is. We hate this guy. Look how wealthy he is. Look how much stuff he has. Look how well things are going for him. They're not going as well for us. And so that envy leads to hatred and anger towards that person. So in verse 22, we find Isaac. He moves again, and they dig the third well. So now he's on the third well. Now this time the Philistines leave him alone. We're not told why. And we're not told what the Philistines were thinking as why they didn't keep pursuing him. Maybe he was far off outside of immediate territory. They're like, okay, finally, he's just leaving us alone. And maybe they forgot about him. Maybe something else distracted them. We don't know. But what does Isaac say? He says it was God. He says the Lord has made room for us. That's the name of the well. Now we have some room. Now we can spread out. Now we have some pasture. We have broad places to spread out in. This is really the faith of Isaac here. God is restraining their evil against him, and so he will be fruitful in the land. That's what he's thinking. God is acting, and we're going to be successful. This is how the world usually treats God's people, though, in this story. This is a continuation of the envy that we looked at last time. The world will continue to harass, even to the point of absurdity. Like, dude, leave this guy alone. Why are you going out after him? But God's people, if that's what they do to God's people if given the chance. So, but God is sovereign, God is in control, and he often, not always, spares his people from the world's hatred. Now, Isaac had to come up against it once, twice, but then God allows him to move to the third one and be safe. And so we see that, sometimes God allows God's people to suffer under the world, and sometimes he protects. God is in control. Isaac needed to go through those trials. He needed to keep moving out from Gerar. That's what he needed to do. And so God protects him. God is instructing him. God is, showing him what's right and what's wrong. That's what God does to his people. Sometimes he disciplines us, but he's always caring for us. And we don't always know why, but that's just how God works. So that's the end of that part of our study, and next time we'll look at how God is faithful to his promise.